weren't coming back home. And when they came back home, they came back to far fewer opportunities than when they began. Why? Because they had restricted access to jobs, housing, and even voting. And I know I teased Ray a little bit earlier. I told him I have the best crime prevention plan in the state of Minnesota. It starts with my own family and my own community to help to create jobs and offer access to housing and to advocate for voting rights. This is my daily work. So all of a sudden I realized that our communities were broken. But Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire, I didn't start with wanting to become an attorney. I wanted to become a teacher. So we had generations of educators in my community. So I knew that there was power in education. And I also believed in the words of Malcolm X, that education is the passport to the future. That was my reality. But when I entered into that kindergarten classroom for my student teaching opportunity, I realized that for far too many children, that passport's permanently revoked. And I remember looking at, the many young people who struggle to do basic things like reading or arithmetic. And it was an easy answer for many teachers. They would say it's their fault. They don't understand. They didn't work hard enough. They didn't come from the right side of the tracks. Whatever the excuse was. But truly it was through no fault of their own. I call that an adult problem. I call that a social problem. I call that an investment problem. When we can choose not to invest in things like early childhood education. In my state and other states across the nation, we spend between 2 and 4 times more on prisons than we do on education. So if those children were struggling, it was through no fault of their own. Because programs like Head Start, 96% of eligible children never have a chance to participate. Why? A values and adult problem. We don't provide funding. So, our children were broken. So I was at this crossroads between the intersection of the highway of race and poverty. And I had a choice to make. It's like our policies are broken. I had a choice to make. What would I do? Sit on the sidelines and even read the headlines, no matter where I traveled to. In the past year, I traveled to about 48 states to give this message of leadership for social justice. The headlines don't change. It's that triple threat that Dr. King talked about. Racism, poverty, and war. I can read the headlines no matter where I am in the world and anticipate what they are, and I don't need to be a prophet. And when I looked at it, I had to make a choice. I could say it's too bad, it's too sad, how unfortunate the social justice issues of our time, or I could take a stand. And I decided, like you, I decided to go to law school. Because I recognized that the law was a language of power, so I needed to become well-versed in that language to help shape the destiny of my community. So you know what time it was. Fighter Esquire, I was ready to go. But I was flying solo, and I only could fly so far. I was missing a link. No good superhero works alone. I needed a team. And I found my team in a civil rights clinic that I helped to create called the Community Justice Project at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. And all of a sudden, what were we doing there together as a team? My students even one year called themselves the Justice League. So I had Justice League East and West. I'm like, this is perfect. Aquaman, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, we were set. But what were we on a mission to do? We were on a mission to make an impact. So when I think about this specifically, my students believed in the words of Charles Hamilton Houston, that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. They said, ouch, let us not end up in that latter category. Even as second-year law students, they said, we can do something. We can grab our pen and paper, like Ida B. Wells, Write for Justice. We can lift our voices like Dr. King and make an impact. We can shape policies like Mary Wright Edelman and stand for children, because she warned, if we don't stand for children, we don't stand for much. So all of a sudden, as a team of superheroes, we weren't just focused on a handful of cases. I'm like, been there, done that in a law school clinic. So we need to really get to the root of the problem to deal with these social issues and policies. So it was time for us to roll up our sleeves. So I'm going to tell you about a few of the campaigns that we worked on, because I hope it gives you the motivation of law being a tool and a language of power once again. But better yet, I'd be remiss. I'm here in Houston Hall. Let me give you a little more about Charles Hamilton Houston. The other thing that he said is that a lawyer is a sentinel. What in the world is that? Against what's wrong. It means that we have to stand guard, stand watch. And if I think about the words of Dr. King, a challenge for you, he said the most tragic thing that we can do is sleep during a revolution. Are you asleep, my friend, or are you awoke and ready to do some work? So my students decided, they said, let's wake up, wake up, wake up. No longer hit snooze, let's do something. So the first campaign that we worked on, we fought against the high cost of prison phone calls. And when I talk about the issues that I worked on, they were up close and personal. Because I remember pre-caller ID, my mom would say, put that phone down gently when you hear collect call from Minnesota State Corrections. It was real because my mom had to choose between accepting that collect prison phone call or paying the basic bills of our housing and our food. So the choices were there. So when they gave me an opportunity to work on that campaign, I said, I remember that feeling. So I'm going to make sure that prison phone calls are fair, reasonable, and just. So we worked on it. Here's one tip. The cause of justice. It doesn't usually happen overnight. I thought I'd write a few letters and it would be done. Nearly 4 years later, we were still advocating before the FCC to place a cap on prison phone calls. We just had our most recent victory this past fall. So, but don't clap for me. Clap for the millions of people, the prisoners, the grandmother, Martha Wright, who took a stand related to prison phone calls, and the families who got involved and advocated and sent a floodgate of letters into the FCC. The other issue that we were working on for a number of years as well, still yet in the state of Minnesota and a challenge of states all across the nation, restore the vote. We fought for voting rights to be restored to felons. Minnesota has this dirty little secret. We'll say, oh, we have the lowest rates of incarceration. We didn't always have some of these low rates. But the dirty little secret is most people are on probation or parole. So if I say it in the vernacular, when I went to the barber shops and talked to people at the beauty salons, the churches, they would say, our people are on paper. That's why we can't vote. So I said, okay, what do we do about this? We fight. We say that that's a current civil rights issue. And the irony of it is I marched in Selma last year for the 50th anniversary march. States like Alabama, when you have a felony, you're not able to vote. It can be a permanent ban. We fight. So we continue to fight on restore the vote for millions of Americans who look like us across the nation who are unable to vote because they're on paper. We also fought for our babies, for our children. And they need each of us to fight for them. I was shocked and appalled. My mom brought home a report from the Children's Defense Fund, the Cradle to the Prison Pipeline campaign. You download it, Google it, get a copy. And as I read it in the introduction, I said, how in the world do we predict that a black boy born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison, a Latino boy a 1 in 6 chance? We can predict that, but we can't predict success. Okay. And we know what works.
All right.
We know education works. We know health care works. We know livable wages work. But we can't invest in that. In the words of Marvin Gaye, makes me want to holler. We have to holler that there's a problem and use our voices as lawyers to do just that. So we advocated back home and nationally for a program sponsored by the Annie E. Casey Foundation called the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative to say that we would use juvenile detention as the last resort and not our first choice. We also fought against the emergence of the school-to-prison pipeline. Every year, millions of children enter into that pipeline being referred out of the classroom for school disciplinary issues, whether it's talking too loud, being disruptive, school fight. But typically, here's another dirty secret that we often don't talk about. It's usually for truancy. Get that? Yep. You're referred to the juvenile justice system for not going to school. It feels a little riddle to me. Right? And more importantly, as lawyers, you'll learn how to ask some key questions. Back home, I started asking questions. They know me as that now. They're like, she's going to ask a question. So I had to raise my hand. I said, I'm just making a little observation here. May I ask, how much does it typically cost to incarcerate a young person in one of these lovely facilities that we call a juvenile detention center? Like, roughly between $360 and $400 a day. I said, imagine if we use those same funds to invest in a family in this rut. Poverty. I got silenced, but I continued to ask questions. So the reality of why I give you those examples, because if you have a voice, you have power. And our legal training gives us unique tools to be those gladiators for justice. And we're commissioned to do just that. Now, if I go back, and you'll notice about law school, they like to talk about the Ancient of Days. And they'll use phrases from Aristotle and Socrates. And Aristotle said one thing that I love, that lawyers are supposed to be the very personification of justice. And if we're supposed to be that, what does that look like? For me, that looks like a call to leadership. How can you use your influence to make an impact? How can you use your voice to challenge injustice? How can you use your skills to problem solve around the social ills that are surrounding us day by day?